Hello, subscribers. I hope all is well. Today you will hear one of the most shocking stories related to slavery and the wickedness of it all. I hope you have the will to listen and watch. Please remember to subscribe. This session will allow us to revisit the evil of Thomas Thistlewood, an examination of life, brutality, and legacy in 18th century Jamaica. If you have never heard the name Thomas Thistlewood, remember it today. So let us get started. Pat will also be helping with the presentation. Thomas Thistlewood, born on 16th of March 1721 and died on the 30th of November 1786, stands as a figure whose life provides an extraordinarily detailed, if deeply disturbing, portal into the heart of 18th century Jamaican slave society. An Englishman who migrated to the colony in 1750, Thistlewood spent over 3 decades, first as an overseer on large estates, and later as the owner of his own smaller property, or pen, in the western parish of Westmoreland. His meticulously kept diaries, spanning nearly 40 years, offer an unparalleled chronicle of plantation life during the zenith of Jamaica's sugar prosperity, documenting the island's social dynamics, agricultural practices, and most infamously, the brutal realities of chattel slavery.
The Thomas Thistlewood papers, spanning about 10,000 manuscript pages in 37 diary volumes and various matebooks, form one of the most detailed primary sources on plantation life in colonial Jamaica. Now housed at Yale's Beinecke Library, the diaries meticulously document Thistlewood's daily activities, including his management of enslaved labor, agricultural practices, financial dealings, and social life. They also reflect his intellectual pursuits, such as scientific observations in botany and meteorology. What makes these records especially disturbing is their tone, emotionless, factual, and devoid of personal reflection, even when recounting acts of extreme violence or sexual exploitation. This detached style means readers must interpret meaning through patterns of behavior rather than moral commentary, offering a chilling look at how cruelty was normalized in the slave system. The diary's juxtaposition is especially jarring. Weather data and scientific notes appear side by side with descriptions of brutal punishments and sexual abuse. This reflects a compartmentalized worldview in which enslaved people were treated as objects of study and control, much like natural phenomena. Influenced by Enlightenment ideals of observation and classification, Thistlewood applied these methods not only to nature, but also to human lives, reducing enslaved individuals to data points in a system of domination. As such, Thistlewood's diaries are not just historical records. They are unflinching witnesses to the violent, dehumanizing logic underpinning Jamaican plantation society.
The user query explicitly invokes the evil of Thomas Thistlewood. This report aims to examine the documented evidence of his cruelty, sadism, and exploitation as recorded in his own hand, placing these actions within the specific historical and social context of 18th century Jamaica. It is not intended as a simple moral condemnation, but rather as a rigorous analysis of the nature, extent, and implications of his documented behavior. The diaries reveal a man who, by his own account, engaged in relentless brutality and sexual predation, seemingly without remorse or questioning the morality of his actions. Indeed, contemporary perspectives, reflected in later commentary, suggest that Thistlewood himself likely saw nothing wrong with his conduct, viewing it as consistent with the norms of his time and place.
Thomas Thistlewood was born on March 16, 1721, in Tupholme, Lincolnshire, England. As the second son of a farmer, his prospects for inheriting land and achieving significant status within English agricultural society were limited. He received an education in Ackworth, West Yorkshire, which included training in mathematics and practical science. An inheritance of £200 sterling from his father at age 6 provided him with the means to eventually seek opportunities abroad, as most of the family estate went to his elder brother. Before settling on Jamaica, Thistlewood gained some experience in commerce, serving as a supercargo on a ship belonging to the East India Company during a 2-year voyage. Returning briefly to England at the age of 29, Thistlewood decided to pursue employment in the lucrative British colony of Jamaica. He He arrived at the port of Savannah-la-Mar in Westmoreland Parish on February 1, 1750, carrying letters of recommendation but without prearranged employment. His Caribbean career began as an overseer, first at Vineyard Pen, a cattle and provisioning estate. In 1751, he secured a position as overseer at Egypt Plantation, a significant sugar estate owned successively by John Cope and William Dorrell. He remained at Egypt Plantation until 1767, a period during which he honed his skills in plantation management and established himself within the local white society. His diaries reveal that within days of starting in Egypt, he began his long-documented pattern of raping enslaved women on the plantation.
Jamaica during this period offered avenues for social and economic advancement for white men that were often unavailable in England. Thistlewood skillfully utilized his experience and the high demand for white supervisors in the colony to accumulate savings. In 1767, he achieved his goal of becoming a landowner, purchasing Breadnought Island Pen, a 160-acre property in Westmoreland. This marked a significant transition in his life, moving from the role of employee, overseer, to proprietor. Breadnought Island Pen was not a sugar estate, but a provisioning pen, focused on raising livestock and cultivating a variety of crops such as vegetables, coffee, and nutmeg. Thistlewood sold this produce primarily to the larger sugar plantations in the vicinity, integrating his smaller operation into the dominant sugar economy. He dedicated himself full-time to his own property after leaving Egypt Plantation. Integral to Thistlewood's identity and economic activity in Jamaica was his role as a slaveholder. Even before purchasing Breadnought Island, he had begun acquiring enslaved people whom he sometimes hired out to larger sugar estates, particularly during the demanding crop season, generating additional income. Upon establishing his own pen, his slaveholdings grew. By 1779, he owned 32 enslaved individuals who worked on Breadnought Island. This number increased slightly to 34 by 1782, comprising 9 men, 12 women, and 13 children or adolescents. As a mark of ownership and control, Thistlewood had all his slaves branded with his initials, TT, on their right shoulders. At the time of his death in 1786, his estate inventory listed 34 enslaved people, recorded as 12 male, 22 female, with no age distinctions.
The Diaries provide rich details about the functioning of Jamaican plantations in the mid-18th century. Thistlewood recorded agricultural techniques, including the planting and harvesting cycles for sugarcane during his time at Egypt Plantation, and later for the diverse provisions grown at Breadnought Island Pen. He noted the care of livestock, methods for assigning work to enslaved individuals, distinguishing between field labor, domestic service, and skilled tasks such as carpentry, performed by Cumberland, fishing, hunting, and taking produce to market, damsel. His records include criteria used for purchasing and selling enslaved people, details on the allotment of provisions, often meager, and observations on the prevalence of illness and high mortality rates among the enslaved population. Interestingly, he also documented the horticultural practices of the enslaved on the small plots of land sometimes allocated to them, noting the produce they grew for their own use or sale.
However, what I'm about to say will shock you, as mentioned in his diaries. The diaries stand as a chilling catalog of the brutality central to Thistlewood's management style and the broader slave system. Physical violence was routine and severe. Flogging. Thistlewood frequently ordered floggings, often exceeding 100 lashes, a common punishment across the island. Restraints. The use of chains and stocks to immobilize and punish enslaved individuals was regularly recorded. Branding. As a permanent mark of ownership and dehumanization, Thistlewood branded all his slaves with his initials, TT. Mutilation. Instances of deliberate disfigurement are noted in the diaries, adding another layer of terror. Aggravated punishments. Thistlewood often intensified punishments by having irritants like salt pickle, lime juice, or pepper, rubbed into the open wounds caused by flogging. Sadistic and inventive torture. Beyond standard brutality, Thistlewood documented punishments notable for their cruelty and designed for humiliation. The most infamous, which he nicknamed Derby's dose, involved forcing one enslaved person to defecate into the mouth of the victim, who was then gagged for hours. Other recorded acts include pickling, rubbing brine into wounds, restraining a runaway, stripping him, covering him with molasses, and leaving him exposed to biting insects overnight, and forcing slaves to urinate into the eyes and mouths of those being punished. The invention and naming of punishments like Derby's dose move beyond mere systemic violence, suggesting a personal investment in refining techniques of terror and degradation, pointing towards a sadistic impulse that extended beyond functional control.
His diaries also outlined systematic sexual exploitation. One of the most shocking aspects of the Thistlewood Diaries is the meticulous, quantitative recording of his sexual assaults against enslaved women. He documented 3,852 instances of sexual intercourse with 138 different enslaved women over his 37 years in Jamaica. These encounters, overwhelmingly non-consensual and constituting rape given the power dynamics of slavery, were logged with the same detached precision as his weather observations or agricultural notes. He often recorded the woman's name, the time of day, the location, field, bed, etc., any small sum of money given for their troubles, and occasionally noted punishments meted out if women resisted his advances. This systematic documentation transforms the assaults from individual acts of violence into a recorded system of sexual terrorism. The sheer scale and the methodical nature of the recording underscore how sexual exploitation was not merely incidental, but integral to the structure of power and Thistlewood's assertion of mastery over the bodies and lives of enslaved women. It was a practice common among white men in the Caribbean slave societies, but Thistlewood's detailed record provides unparalleled evidence of its pervasiveness and function within the plantocracy. The act of recording itself, turning violation into data, became part of the dehumanizing process.
A key question arising from Thomas Thistlewood's diary is whether his brutal treatment of enslaved people was exceptional or representative of wider planter norms in 18th century Jamaica. Evidence suggests extreme violence was systemic, rooted in fear from the white minority and the perceived need to maintain control through terror. Though some peers viewed other whites as excessively violent, Thistlewood's behavior appeared within accepted bounds, implying his cruelty was not abnormal. The sadistic nature of certain punishments, like Derby's dose, suggests a personal level of depravity. Ultimately, his diary reflects a violent system where cruelty was normalized, not just personal.
While Thistlewood's diaries primarily reflect his own perspective and preoccupations, they offer invaluable, albeit filtered, glimpses into the lives and experiences of the specific enslaved individuals under his control. These glimpses, however fragmented, serve to counter the totalizing dehumanization inherent in the slave system by revealing aspects of personality, strategy, and relationship. Thiba emerges as the most complex figure. Her decades-long relationship with Thistlewood involved clear elements of exploitation, but also, arguably, negotiation and perhaps even affection. She wielded influence within the household, engaged in independent economic activity, owning livestock, sowing, lending money to Thistlewood, secured advantages for herself and her son, and ultimately achieved manumission. Yet Thistlewood's own description of her living in miserable slavery underscores the fundamental constraints of her existence. Her story exemplifies the intricate ways enslaved individuals navigated intimate relationships with enslavers, leveraging connections for survival and limited autonomy within an overwhelmingly oppressive structure. Mulatto John, Thistlewood's son with Fibba, received an education at his father's expense, indicating a degree of paternal recognition and investment unusual for the time, though his ultimate fate remains outside the scope of these records. Other individuals, the diaries briefly illuminate others, Lincoln, the driver, hunter, and fisherman, held a position of relative status, but also exhibited defiance. Cumberland, the skilled hired carpenter, whose essential labor gave him leverage but who also frustrated Thistlewood with perceived resistance, lateness, stupidity. Damsel, responsible for selling produce at market, possessed significant mobility and independence compared to field hands. Abba, a valued domestic slave who received her own house and for whom no punishments were recorded, and Cudjo, a field slave who appeared to use claims of illness strategically to avoid undesirable work assignments. The unnamed. Beyond these few individuals who emerge with some clarity, the diaries implicitly reference the suffering of countless others. The field gangs enduring brutal labor, the sick and dying, and particularly the 138 women subjected to Thistlewood's systematic sexual violence, whose individual experiences of trauma remain largely obscured, but are undeniably present in the cold, repetitive entries.
Thomas Thistlewood's diaries are among the most detailed records of 18th century Jamaican slavery, offering a chilling window into the normalized brutality of the plantation system. While his behavior may not have been seen as exceptional by contemporaries, his meticulous documentation reveals both the systemic and deeply personal dimensions of violence. Thistlewood's punishments, especially his sexual abuse of enslaved women, were both reflections of and contributions to a regime rooted in terror, commodification, and control. The diaries also inadvertently preserve glimpses of enslaved agency. Figures like Fibba, who maintained a decades-long relationship with Thistlewood while leveraging limited forms of autonomy, and others, such as Lincoln, Damsel, and Abba, highlight how enslaved individuals strategized for survival within a dehumanizing system. Though filtered through Thistlewood's gaze, these narratives humanize the enslaved, challenging the reduction of their identities to mere property. Beyond individual cruelty, the diaries exemplify the structural pillars of Jamaican slavery: calculated neglect, sexual violence, management through terror, and white social mobility built on exploitation. Thistlewood's success underscores how violence was economically and socially rewarded within the colonial order. Modern relevance lies in how these records reveal the intimate, economic, and racial dynamics that powered slavery and how they echo in today's inequalities. Studying Thistlewood forces us to grapple with moral complicity, systemic evil, and the ways ordinary individuals can normalize atrocity. Ethical engagement with his diaries also demands critical reflection, centering the voices of the enslaved, avoiding voyeurism, and ensuring these painful histories are honored with dignity and purpose. We are excited to bring you more content. A few links in our description will provide more information on this wicked man. Please subscribe and share the content.